Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending the Future of Material Sustainability Information, a joint webinar between SASB and Workiva. We're excited to have everyone in attendance. Just a few housekeeping items. We're going to be sending out a recording and slides after the webinar. And if you are looking to receive CPE credit today, I have some formal words that I have to read. Please note that we will be asking you to answer 4 multiple choice questions during today's event. So those are going to be in the form of poll questions. Receiving your credit is dependent on submitting an answer for at least 3 of these 4 questions and attending the full duration. If you are watching as a group, please log in individually so you make sure you receive your credit. If you qualify for CPE credit, you will receive an email from training@workiva.com within 1 week of today's webinar with access instructions to download your certificate. And if unfortunately you're having technology issues, we can't issue those credits. So hopefully everything is okay on your end technology-wise. There is one amendment to today's agenda. Laurel Peacock for NRG has not yet been able to get on the line. We understand that something's going on. So if she is able to join on the line, we will throw it to her when it's her turn. But for now, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Liv Watson, who's the Director of New Markets at Workiva.
Hello, and thank you to SASB and Workiva for bringing us together for this important discussion. Materiality and disclosure, what could be more important right now? Over the decades since security laws were enacted in the 30s and as accounting standards matured more in the 40s, it was considered compatibility and accessibility of data to the public as an important milestone to build trust in the marketplace. As business and society has changed, we moved away just to think about financial data as non-financial data becomes just as important as both industry change as well as expectations of the marketplace from the investors. So before I go in and talk a little bit overview why we're here, Jeff is going to talk a little bit about the standards after, once I kind of give a little overview. We will talk a little bit about the contribution from companies like Laura's company, and then we talk a little bit about the future, and then I'll summarize that the truth of the matter is that disclosure is becoming too complex for human interpretation at all. The big data that we have to collect and summarize and produce and multiply into multiple reports, technology has to start take effect as the volume of data becomes beyond human compatibility. But before I go in and give an overview of why we're here and kind of our focus, we will have a polling question. So for those who are interested in getting their CPE, that is a requirement. So the first question that we have, Alex, would you like to take that poll for us?
Yeah, so we are going to do our first poll question. Just 1 second. So the first poll is, what best describes your organizational role? You're going to get to choose between A, sustainability reporting, B, financial reporting, C, consulting, D, investment analysis, and E, other. So 1 second, we're going to launch the poll. The poll is open. Please vote. We see some responses coming in. Most people have voted pretty quickly. I'll give it a few more seconds. All right, about 80% of votes have come in. I'll give it 2 more seconds. All right, that's pretty good. All right, we'll close the poll. All right, there's the results. So we have about 23% are involved in sustainability reporting, 14% in financial reporting, 21% consulting, 15% investment analysis, 27% others. So it's a pretty good representation of people involved in the sustainability information discussion.
Thank you again. And as we talk about why materiality or sustainability reporting, a couple of years ago, I did a chapter of a book with Bob Eccles, and what we did was analyze about 500 companies that claim to have produced integrated report, and we tried to codify them into some kind of system of the quality of the data points and how they described it. But I will tell you, that was the longest 8 months doing analysis because there was no way of comparing information. It was very difficult because the marketplace is communicating their information in different metrics, etc. The other thing that was a trend was that just because they were kind of integrated reporting, I think that, and even disclosure in other aspects, was that they added hundreds of pages instead to tell their story. So this notion in the marketplace now, driven by investors, who talks about that we don't just need the financial data to make assessment anymore, we need both financial and non-financial data, but they also have always been the driver that they need comparable information. Comparable information meaning they can then compare it to other companies so that they can make analysis and make good data-driven decisions. There's been, when you look at how financial reporting standards having evolved in the 40s, it started to be every country developed their own kind of standards, and it became an alphabet soup. So this kind of standardization for IFRS and US GAAP has kind of helped bring some kind of compatibility to financial statement. But until SASB really came to the marketplace to really look at it from a materiality standpoint, so we don't look at more pages, but let's start focusing on what's material to the company. This is not just coming from investor and companies. Even at the SEC recently, if you look at the feedback that the SEC got from a concept release, they disclosed in April 2017, asking for public comments with regards to what should the future disclosure environment look like. And many of those letters of feedback, representing $168 trillion worth of US dollars of asset management managers, signed a signed letter to the SEC asking them to, in fact, go broader beyond just financial data and integrate material sustainability data into the annual report for disclosure to the US SEC. So you're starting to see kind of the regulatory aspect of things starting to wake up in Europe recently, where SASB Standards was referenced as a respectable standard or a recommended standard to use. There is a mandate EU-wide to have sustainable disclosures starting in 2018. So it's not just in that investor that wants it, the regulators who has the responsibility to oversee company and ensuring trust in the marketplace, sees non-financial material issues impacting and being a risk. From a company perspective, you're also starting to see, I think, that traditional, when sustainability or even became an issue in companies, it was kind of siloed in the corner, nice to have, yes, we need to talk about it, but it wasn't integrated really into the company thinking. PwC gave, as their annual global CEO survey in last year, said that 64% of the respondent or CEOs said that now corporate responsibility is core to their business, rather than being that standalone program begging for resources and educating. Now you're seeing that these sustainable issues are actually in the boardroom of corporation. It also has to do that SEC has a regulation that talks that anything of materiality has to be disclosed in the management discussion or disclosed in other places, but the fact that non-financial data is becoming more material and more risky, it is implied that the material issue has to be disclosed to even today. I do know that SASB and SEC is looking at redefining and aligning materiality again, but at the end of the day, we need to have material information that are important, or it's going to be information overload. We also have to improve reputation. I have to say that reputation is probably something that could take 10 years to build, but can be gone in a day. And by having better sustainability, better relationship with other stakeholders, you can dampen those as time when it is in need, because nobody is 100% perfect. But building those relationships and disclosing it to the marketplace builds better reputation. There's also always been that corporations should look at, and you see this from an investor side, that the investors are kind of more short-term focused. You're starting to see in the marketplace of companies that are seeing that long-term companies that talk about bringing value long-term are more successful in the marketplace than those that are thinking short-term. Harvard just released a paper that said, and I read it, and I thought that was a very good comment. It said, companies guess often the investor they deserve. So in that, they look at disclosure to make better reputational risk, as well as ensuring they are in line with the rules and regulations. We have experts here today, so I'm going to move quickly to the next slide to introduce Jeff and David and Lauren as we get to talking about introducing and talk more about the SASB standard, because we have experts. So enough from me. If we can move to the next slide, I will then introduce the panel. And
so do you want me to go back to the introductory slide, correct, Liz?
Yes.
Okay.
So with that, just quickly, with the introduction, Jay Hales, Vice Chairman of the SASB Board Standard. I mean, amazing background to understanding the standard, the issues that has been addressed in the marketplace, and each panelist will introduce themselves, give some more background to them. David, Head of Research or Deputy Director of Research at SASB, has rolled up his sleeves and looked at all kinds of scenarios in the marketplace. And then we have Laurel Peacock, who is a Senior Sustainability Manager. And the reason NRG Energy, she will give you more insight into that, is that they didn't just sit by and wait for the standards to come to market. They took a really proactive role in getting involved with the standard, as well as taking that knowledge back and implementing at their company. So I'm very honored to be in a position to chair this, moderate this panelist, but I'm going to turn it over to Jeff. And Jeff, please give a little bit more background to yourself before you go into the slide. But I know we're all looking forward to hearing and learning more about the standards and what's going on.
Thanks, Liv. Appreciate the introduction. Yeah, I'd like to, I guess, explain a little bit about my background. So my full-time job is I'm an accounting professor at the Georgia Institute of Technology, and have been teaching and studying financial reporting for a long time. And have been involved in policy making from more of the traditional financial reporting perspective with the Financial Accounting Standards Board. Worked there as a research fellow for a while. I sit on their senior advisory committee right now, Financial Accounting Standards Advisory Committee, FASAC, and so I've been very interested in getting good information to the markets for a long time, but since 2012 have been involved with the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board in a variety of roles over those years, but now sitting on the standard setting board at SASB and serving as vice chair on that board. So that's a little bit of context for my background and kind of my thoughts. What I would say, of course, as well, is that everything I kind of convey today are things that I believe and reflect my own opinion, but wouldn't necessarily reflect the opinion of any organization that I'm affiliated with, as they all have due process that they would go through to decide official policies and things. So this is all just reflecting my own opinions today. So I guess what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about how we got here, if that would, does that make sense, Liv?
Yeah, so I think we got your slides up now here, so please take it away.
Great. Actually, I think there's a second poll question we're going to do right before we jump in, Jeff. Is that
perfect?
Does that
Yeah.
work with the flow?
Let's do it.
Great. Okay, so the second question we're going to do is, where are you with your sustainability disclosure process? A, regularly report. B, collect data but keep in-house. C, various departments collect but no uniform analysis. So I will launch that poll and give folks some time to vote. All right, we've got about 60% of folks who have voted. I'll give it a few more seconds.
I think it's important to remind everybody that if you don't answer these questions, you won't qualify for CPE. It's a part of the process to qualify.
All right. Yep, so we have about 65% of the attendees voting, so I'm going to close it in about 2 seconds. So to Liv's point, now's your chance. All right, I'm going to close the poll, and let's share the results. So it looks like the majority of folks do the option C, various departments collect but no uniform analysis. So Jeff, now I think we can go over to you. Great.
Yeah, so I'd like to provide some context for how SASB has, what they've been working on over the years and sort of where we're at right now, and just make sure everyone's kind of, has a common understanding of what SASB is about and what our purpose is. So let me start by saying, SASB is not a government organization. It's not given a mandate by the government or anybody in particular. It's an independent standard setting body that is led by a 9-member standard setting board that deliberates on sustainability related standard setting issues and is focused on developing industry specific sustainability accounting standards. So this would be trying to go industry by industry to identify what are the environmental, social, and governance issues that are material to investors, both in the equity and in debt markets, fixed income. So that is kind of our mandate, what we believe in, and so the idea is that primarily like these standards could be used by public companies to provide information on these issues in annual reports that are filed with like the SEC. So really trying to focus on the disclosure channel where investors and creditors are primarily focused to get that key information into their hands. So that's the mission and the overarching objective of SASB. And so you can kind of think about how we approach the process of developing these standards from 2 ways. One of those would be conceptually. So thinking about the approach that SASB takes to deciding what are the what will result in useful information and what are we trying to achieve. So the SASB has developed a conceptual framework, just like the Financial Accounting Standards Board and like the International Accounting Standards Boards have developed. It's important to have a conceptual grounding so that there's really kind of a basis for the due process that we go through in thinking about, for any given industry, what is the information that would be most useful. So there's a slide that has our conceptual framework, or at least like a visual representation of what the conceptual framework is. But the core of this slide is really that it's all about trying to lead up to information that will be material, decision useful, and also cost effective. There's no, it's not actually, we're not actually helping investors if we give them decision useful information that is too costly to provide, and it's, even if the information is not that costly to provide, if it's not decision useful, then it's going back to Liv's point from earlier, it would contribute more to disclosure overload than actually would be not actually ultimately decision helpful or useful to investors. So that's kind of the core of the conceptual basis that we use for developing standards. But you can also then, another view of thinking about what SASB does is to kind of think about the due process that we go through. So there's kind of this cycle of standard setting development that we use, and it begins with industry research. So that's kind of the core of what we do, is think about industry by industry. What evidence is there out there on the important material information that could affect the ability of firms to actually, continue on in a sustainable fashion, earning, returns for the investors that are have taken a stake in the company. So we do industry research. We do a lot of outreach to various working groups, trying to get as much consultation time as we can with both investors and also issuers, as well as like other constituents that would be impacted by this information. And then there's a process of vetting all of that, both inside the organization and then ultimately going up to the standards setting board, the SASB board, where we, ultimately vote on issues, and the vote is meant to reflect the views of these 9 board members who come from different backgrounds. So some having more of an issuer perspective or a legal perspective, legal background, others having more of like the investor user information background. And then everything that we vote on gets put out for public comment for a 90-day period. And I would mention that we're in the process of having, over the last 5 years, developed the provisional standards for each of 79 industries. We've been, over the last year, doing a deep consultation and outreach and looking at recommended changes that we might make to make those even more useful to investors and more cost effective for issuers. And so we've proposed a number of changes as part of a technical agenda. And so in early October, we actually put those out for public comments for a 90-day period. So I would encourage anybody that's listening that's interested in the standards, the information that could be produced by companies in particular industries or sectors to go to the SASB website, look at the proposed standards and changes. Please provide comments through our public comment portal, because we really welcome feedback. It's the only way in which we can kind of make the best decisions for both investors and issuers. So once that process finishes at the end of the year, we'll make any revisions that we feel are appropriate after getting that consultation, and then ultimately, the goal is early next year to codify the provisional standards so that they can be used by companies in the upcoming reporting cycles. I guess the last slide that I'd like to comment on just provides an example of what we're really hoping for, which is that you can kind of move sustainability information from the no disclosure or boilerplate, very vague type of disclosure to something where you can really use, you get quantitative information that can be used for peer-to-peer comparisons, for industry benchmarking, that's available right there in front of investors also combined with financial information so that they can have all the information that they need to really make good decisions about how to allocate capital. So yeah, I'll stop it there. Kind of throw it back to Liv.
Thank you, Jeff. Understanding in 3 slides how you put all that together in a clear format, because I know the kind of work it goes into creating a framework and developing standards. I think the next Laurel is with us here. We're going to hear, so Laurel, please introduce yourself and give a little background as well. But I think the fact that you come from the industry, you've been working with your company, you've been volunteering your time to help develop the standards, commenting on the standards. I think many would like to hear your view on this. So I will turn it back over to you for the next slide.
Liv, actually, we have sorry, Laurel, a poll before we move on to Laurel. But Laurel, it's good to hear you. We were having some technical issues that we've settled on. So I'm just going to run the next, the third poll before we get to Laurel's presentation. So the question is, where do you see value for standardized ways to assess and report on sustainability information? A, cost effectiveness, B, investor communications, C, cross-industry dialogue, and D, trustworthiness. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll, give folks a few seconds to vote. And like Liv said, if you need those CPE credits, please participate. Thanks. All right, so we have about half of you voting. I'll give it a few more minutes. Or seconds, sorry. Okay, 2 more seconds and I'll close the poll. All right, I'm going to share the results. So it looks like most people are seeing value in investor communications, which makes sense. 10% cost effectiveness, 21% cross-industry dialogue, 14% trustworthiness. Thank you for your participation. And Laurel, I will move on to the next slide.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Laurel, and I'm a senior manager in NRG's corporate sustainability department. And I am going to speak with you today just briefly about NRG's experience and journey in including the SASB standards and why I think it's important for issuers to participate, particularly in this next round of comments in order to shape the future of the standards. So just briefly, NRG is an integrated power company primarily based in the US. So our business platform is threefold, really. We have wholesale generation, a retail arm, and also a business solutions arm. So this puts us, at least in the provisional standards, in the electric utility sector, which is now electric utilities and power producers. And so this, in 2016, so about a year ago, April, we decided to publish a SASB report at the end of our sustainability report. So again, this is not in our financial filings yet, but this was our first step toward really applying and integrating these standards into our regular reporting. And we decided to do this for many of the reasons you've already heard today: improved reputation, risk mitigation, improved stakeholder engagement, and potential for a competitive advantage. But also because, as those of us in the sustainability reporting communication space know, it's very crowded voluntary reporting space today. It's complicated for us as practitioners. It's complicated to disseminate the information to the stakeholders who want to receive it. So with that in mind, NRG is really looking to support transparency in reporting, especially when it directly contributes to generating comparable and consistent data within our industry. And particularly for our key stakeholder audience, which is investors as well, engaged in long-term decision-making, the SASB standards are really an efficient tool for communicating this decision-useful information in a streamlined manner. So one of the first things we did is, a gap analysis with our current voluntary and financial reporting. And it really was efficient and cost-effective for us to do this report at this time, because we found about 80% of our sustainability key issues aligned with the SASB standards for our sector. And the remaining 20% was somewhat aligned, but just required either some additional analysis or, you know, with respect to the boundaries, units, and scope. And just keep in mind, at the time of NRG's report publication, as the standards were provisional, there was some uncertainty about what the final version would look like. So in order to manage this kind of level of ambiguity about the changing metrics and kind of prepare to adapt, we had a couple of really important thought partners in this process. And one of them is just a kind of fact that NRG is part of a really productive working group in our industry that is focused on sustainability and metrics. So in this forum, we've had kind of excellent opportunities to discuss what those key metrics are with peers. And I think that really kind of spoke to the alignment with the metrics that were also in the SASB standards and provisional version. But also, I really wanted to, you know, kind of give a shout out to our sector analysts for infrastructure, because so not only are there publicly available, you know, SASB documents out there that are very useful, but at the time, Brian Esterly, who was assigned to our sector, really was a really helpful thought partner in kind of further guidance and explanation as we navigated how to implement this. So, for example, you know, and early on, Brian informed me that some of the sections I had thought were required for NRG to disclose were not actually intended for independent power producers. They were for regulated utilities. So that saved me a lot of time and probably headaches. So throughout this first year, also being based in San Francisco, I was fortunate enough to be able to meet with him kind of in person. And so throughout that process, I think it was kind of, it was really valuable to kind of have that fluid communication. And, you know, he was able to also connect me with other issuers outside of my sector that were going through this same process. And the process itself, I think, with, you know, other kind of tools such as we conduct a, you know, a key issue or materiality assessment, the process is often just as valuable as the end results. So through this entire process, it has really facilitated not only external stakeholder engagement, but internal. With my investor relations team and, you know, legal teams, this has provided a similar language with which to discuss kind of environmental, social, and governance issues. And you know, so I think really to kind of sum it up is, you know, NRG's vision is to create a sustainable energy future, and transparency and reporting are key mechanisms to communicate and enable that future. So my kind of call to action today is for my, you know, my fellow corporations and issuers, everybody, but particularly the companies, to make your voice heard in this final comment period, because really at the end of the day, these standards will be implemented by us as the issuers. So it's really imperative that our perspective is included. There's a ton of great resources out there. And again, I think the process is incredibly valuable, and please talk with your sector analysts. They are just really going to be your kind of key conspirator on this process. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Laura. I mean, there's nothing like getting insight to applying it, and we kind of in a new journal here today. We're going to go on to one more polling question as the requirement for CPE, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the comment, public comment period and the standards development. So please, Alex, take our poll.
Yes, so the last fourth of four poll questions: is there good understanding within your organization around the connection between sustainability information and financial performance? Yes, no, somewhat, not at all. I will launch the poll, and please vote. So a little bit more than half of you have voted. That's great. Give it a few more seconds. Okay, so I'm going to close the poll and share the results. More than half say somewhat, which I think is a positive thing, that people get that there's this connection between sustainability and information and financial performance. 16% yes, 18% no, 10% say no, not at all. So there's obviously still work to be done. And so with that, we will move to David.
Great, thank you so much.
And David, yeah, I was going to say, please introduce yourself.
Will do, thank you. My name is David Parham. I'm one of two Deputy Directors of Research here at the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. And I'm also one of the sector analysts that Laurel mentioned. I cover the extractives and minerals processing sector, which includes oil and gas industry and metals and mining. So I've been at SASB for a little over a year, maybe a year and a half now. And before that, I come from an industry background. I worked in the oil and gas industry for about 9 years. So I was able to bring a bit of that issuer perspective to my role here. And just to follow on to the great presentation by Laurel, I'm going to contextualize the current public comment period and emphasize really the value that SASB gets from the market engagement and feedback that we get and how critical that is to the process and the quality of the standards. So I'll touch a bit on what Jeff mentioned earlier in his presentation from the perspective of the staff here who are responsible for doing the research and the consultation and making the recommendations to the board for their consideration in their decisions and votes about the stewardship of the standards. So to touch on the key pillars that the SASB staff always keeps in mind and keeps in front of us in our standards development process, it's exactly what Jeff mentioned, and that's focusing on evidence-based research, an industry-specific approach, and critically market feedback in the development of the standards. And as this slide shows, there's several stages of opportunities for the market to provide feedback to our standard setting process. And a recent critical period was the consultation period that Jeff mentioned that occurred in late 2016 and early this year. And that featured some great in-depth discussions between the analysts on our team that focus on the specific sectors and industries for which we've developed standards, and folks on the investment side, analysts that focus on those industries, as well as companies within those industries, to really talk about the materiality of the topics we have in our standards and the usefulness and cost effectiveness of the metrics that we include, which are designed to convey performance on those topics. And the feedback that we received throughout that consultation was an incredibly valuable body of research that we were able to then translate into a technical agenda, which we presented to Jeff and the board earlier this year, which was the staff's recommendation for what we felt based on that consultation and additional research we had done was appropriate to place under review for potential change, going from the provisional version of the standards to the final codified version of the standards. So that technical agenda included 248 items and was published at the end of July of this year. So with that technical agenda in place, the staff then went forward with developing proposed revisions to the standards, again, based on the research that we conducted and the incredible and extensive consultations that we conducted with industry and with investors. And I want to emphasize that there's two key documents that were produced by the staff that have been published on our website for this public comment period. The first is an exposure draft, and that is a redline version of the standards, including the proposed changes related to those agenda items. So you'll see if you download any sector standard, it'll include all the industry standards and a red line of any proposed change to that standard. And the second key document, again for each sector, is a basis for conclusion, and that's also available on our website. And that describes the nature of the changes that you'll see in the exposure draft, and also provide the staff's rationale behind why the change has been proposed, and a summary of the consultative feedback that was received from both issuers and investors and third parties related to that change. So really hoping to provide the market with a view of the rationale behind the change to help them understand and provide comments back to the SASB staff and ultimately to the SASB board. So Those documents were voted on by the board. The board approved placing them on our website and making them publicly available for this public comment period. And that period, as Jeff mentioned, started at the beginning of October and will continue through the end of this year. Related to that public comment, the SASB staff and the SASB board are very interested in any feedback from all of our stakeholders in the market, and especially feedback which relates to those changes which have been proposed and are highlighted in the exposure draft, the accompanying basis for conclusion. And these changes are broadly kind of broken down into 3 primary buckets. And the first is there's some topic level changes, so additions to or removal of or reframing of certain topics in the standards. The second are metric level changes, so that's specific changes to the way that we're proposing to measure and report performance on those topics in the standard. And the third are technical protocol related changes, and that's really the details of how issuers prepare the headline metrics. It gets down into the details of exactly what the process is to present those, to collect the data and present those numbers and ensure comparability between companies when they're preparing disclosures related to the standard. So we're really interested in feedback from the market on those proposed changes, and especially the extent to which the market believes these changes reinforce the concepts that we're committed to in our conceptual framework, where we describe our approach to standard setting, as Jeff summarized earlier with that great triangle slide that we use quite frequently. So as Jeff mentioned, at the end of the public comment period, the staff will then review all the comment letters received and present the findings to the board for their final vote to ratify the standards, incorporating any changes that result from that public comment period. So I just want to emphasize throughout this process the incredible importance and criticality of having that market feedback that Laurel mentioned, and the importance and the openness and encouragement that the analyst team has to have those conversations. We all really appreciate the time from folks from industry and from investors to get on the phone with us, to send us notes, send us emails, to provide your views on the standards and ensure that we're well informed in our standards development process. And just want to especially encourage folks to take the opportunity to participate in this public comment period and submit a letter, as this is a really critical milestone for us in terms of moving from the current provisional phase to the ratification of the standards and having them available out in the marketplace for companies to adopt. So just want to again reiterate the encouragement and how valuable it is to receive those public comment letters, and hope folks will consider providing us with that feedback. So as Jeff mentioned, please.
Yeah, could I jump in for just a second on that, David? So I would like to just express as from the board's perspective, the consultation period is very important to us, and we really encourage feedback, and I don't want listeners to be deterred by the fact that there are close to 300 changes that have been proposed. Keep in mind that that is across 79 industries. So if there's a particular industry that you're looking at, there may only be 3 or 4 changes in that particular industry, and so we do encourage you to go look at whatever industries where you have expertise or interest, and please give us your comments on the standard and specifically on the proposed changes as well. It's very helpful and crucial to the entire process.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. And also to that end, the analysts are here to assist you in any way in accessing the materials that are of most interest to you. So please don't hesitate to reach out to the sector analysts associated with your industry if we can offer any support in the preparation of any feedback you'd like to provide to us. So that's really all I had to share on the public comment period. And again, really look forward to folks' feedback. It's incredibly valuable to both the staff and to the board. And I'll pass it back to Liv.
Thank you, David. If you look how short term that SASB has been around, I am quite impressed of the accomplishment that you've done. I also want to emphasize with this feedback, I know I've been with the public company for many years. We send feedback letter to the SEC, and we sometimes feel that is that worth our time? And I'm telling you, the standard setters, they strive on these comment letters and they really listen to it. So I assume SASB has the same. It's, please, the more quality feedback you get, the standards will only be better. I'm going to quickly just switch off 2 seconds before we go into a little dialogue, as time is flying here. But if we are in any possible way going to be able to now, on top of that, meet all of these other data sets, we look at silos of factories inside corporation of data being stored. You have multiple internal and external report where if you change data one place, that impacts in other places. So this whole notion of good data governance is becoming more and more important now. There is no regulation for assurance on sustainability data, but it won't be long. Certain countries are already mandating it, but the quality of data is becoming key. Gartner just came out with a report recently that said that poor data quality accounts for 20% of business process costs. That adds up to $611 billion. So my background is working a lot with the regulators. I'm also, for some of you might Grinch on this call, one of the founders of XBRL. And the reason why people get upset about XBRL, and this is why my argument is also that we need sustainability data. If this data is going to be disclosed to the SEC, we need it in discoverable, machine-readable data. SEC mandates all the financial data to be in XBRL. So I talk about the future as this programmable ecosystem or regulatory reporting. And working with Workiva, I get to work in an environment where I do nothing but think all day about how we can make a programmable ecosystem around disclosure. Even when you start thinking about it, just silos of information, if you don't reimagine your data architecture in this, you might be, like Jeff said earlier, that if the data to collect is too costly to industry, then it doesn't become necessarily into the standard now. Well, we got to digitize the process, and not just because regulators want structured digitally tagged data, but internally to your organization, if you use mixed tag data and cloud technology, you can now have a single source of the truth that links to multiple views, being it in a PowerPoint or in Excel or in any other data format. That data is linked. I was speaking to some CEOs, CFOs here in Amsterdam the other day, and they basically say, if I don't see data that's linked to one truth for this data, I don't trust it. So we have the future to think about, and technology like XBRL and cloud is really changing that dynamic. So instead of going into too many discussion around that, I'd like to go back to the panel that without technology, all of this might just be dream for many companies to collect it, and having good data governance around it is important. I'd like to go back. We have the standards. These are new standards. How can I become an expert? I mean, you talk about you have the infrastructure at SASB, but Jeff, can you talk a little bit, or David talk a little bit about your thinking with regards to getting the marketplace educated?
Sure. Actually, I think, David, probably, if you could talk to the certification programs that SASB's been developing.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Liv, for the question, and Jeff for the opportunity to respond. And we have a whole team of folks here that are very focused on developing and providing educational support to the market related to use and consideration of the standards. One of the key things that we offer as part of our educational programs is an FSA credential. And that's a two-step process whereby SASB provides some really I think, having recently started studying for this, some really well-designed educational material to help learn about, the FSA stands for Fundamentals of Sustainability Accounting Credential, help understand the importance of material sustainability issues and accounting for performance on issues and considering them in the investment decision-making process, and really helps walk through the use of the SASB standards and how to consider them and implement them in your organization. So that is a great resource that we have available, and we have a team of which Alex is a member of the team that is available to help folks learn more about that program and understand how it can be useful within their roles within the organization.
Thank you so much, Alex. I'd like to ask Laurel here a little bit, because companies are trying to think about implementing sustainability even into their internal thinking. So being part of the standard setting process, as you were very actively involved, did you get good support from the senior executive team? And did you have expectation that if you go there and help develop it, how can we implement it? And where did you get support, and how did you go about getting that support?
Yeah, so I am fortunate, I think, in my executive leadership at NRG. We have a very supportive and active CEO, and our VP of Sustainability, who reports up to, our corporate compliance director, and then reports to CEO. So just a few steps kind of removed. So I did really have excellent access to my executives and to my general counsel. And I think that we're kind of very fortunate in that, but having said that, it's a constant communication, a constant dialogue. I think throughout the process of creating the SASB report, I am now more involved on a regular basis with my investor relations team. So I help, field questions, and I'm on calls with them. And NRVP will go on investor roadshows. So it's really helped provide a link, a very direct and tangible link to that process. And also, Liv, I wanted to talk about the assurance piece that you mentioned, because one of the other things we did is we had an external securities council consultant do a kind of a readiness assessment as well, because we really are looking at the issue of data quality and how really there is a very set process for information that goes into our financial filings, but not for ESG information yet. So that is something that we are actively looking at, and it will take a lot of work, but it's really crucial in order to kind of make this scalable across all industries.
I'd like to ask every one of you if you can give you, and thank you, Laura, for that feedback, because inside the company, but I'd like to ask you this right now. Most sustainability reporting, except for the EPA, and if it's material, it might end up in the management discussion. What's the role? What's the relationship? Should SEC mandate this? What's the relationship? What do you see coming from the SEC, and your opinion to each one of you? Should SASB standards be mandated by the SEC?
So I'll start off on that one. I think the view that I've heard, and I think reflects the SASB opinion, but again, this is my own opinion about this, is that that the SEC already has in place existing rules around materiality, and so has provided feedback to companies on like the broad issue of does the guidance around reporting on material risks and trends apply to issues like the environment. And they have said, like, we're not saying companies should necessarily comment on the environment, but if they think they should be commenting on the environment, if they think it's a material issue, then they should be talking to investors about that. And I think what that, from my perspective, what that captures is this view that what is material is ultimately to each company to determine. And And so, you know, it's not that all companies need to be reporting on all things, and yet I think the flip side of that is that if all companies are doing unique things, then it's very difficult for investors to get comparable information, because it puts a heavy burden on each company to sort of come up with their own solution to talking about material risks and trends, and that leaves investors trying to compare information that may be quite disparate. And so, you know, the view of SASB is to try to fill a gap there by letting the market kind of inform our standard setting process, and then let firms use those standards to help be a guide to addressing material issues, but still meeting the materiality question from a firm by firm basis, without the SEC needing to say, oh, all companies should report on issue X or Y, or all companies should be using SASB standards, and that's it. You know, I think there's a place for a market solution to this, and I think, you know, we hope that SASB is an integral part of the market-based solution.
Yeah, and you also take. Yes, please. I was going to ask you to that comment. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you. This is David. Just to add on, I would reiterate exactly what Jeff said. And one interesting data point that we rely on is a research report that we produce called the Annual State of Disclosure Report. And it's interesting to note that a majority, around 80% of the topics that we include in our standards, are already being reported on by companies in their regulatory filings. That disclosure varies in terms of the type of disclosure. We categorize it as boilerplate or company-tailored narrative or the use of metrics. So really, as Jeff mentioned, our standards are identifying topics that are already likely to be material for companies in a given industry based on industry-specific characteristics, and then seeking to enhance the value and quality of that disclosure by making it comparable through the creation of a market standard to ensure that as companies are talking about performance on these important issues, that it's done so in a way that is comparable and easily understood by the market.
We heard from the standard setters what they think about the mandate. I would love to hear, Laura, what you think from a company perspective.
Well, I'll just say that I mean, I agree with Jeff in that the market-based solution and David, the market-based solution is really where it's at. Requiring us to disclose just for the sake of more information out there is not going to be useful. So whatever happens, the kind of devil's in the details as far as providing input, particularly why this process is so important, because really at the end of the day is what we're looking for. You know, evaluating, you know, where our discussion lies right now, in including non-financial information, and you know where it does kind of enhance disclosure and provide with more just as useful information, then you know we're all for it.
It's interesting. Europe is driven by mandate, right? But they kind of got a different approach to it. Disclose, but if you don't disclose, tell us why you didn't disclose. So it's not the mandate. It's you have to disclose, so you have to tell them how not to. But America, it is market driven, and I think the standard setting process that SASB did was also set up on that same concept, that these are market driven standard, not the police authority on the top trying to dictate how companies disclose. We are over the hour. I said this is a very interesting topic. We could be here all day, I think, talking about this, but I'd like to give the panelists 1 minute each to say what are the key takeaway our audience should take before we say thank you for their attention. Laura, you're a lady. You get to start.
My key takeaway is to participate in the consultation process right now. Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, I would echo that. We'd love to get feedback, and I would just encourage everyone who's listening to be involved in the process, not just comment, but also, you know, use the information where you can. If you're on the issuer side, communicate it to your investors and creditors. Get that information out there. Use it inside of your firm as well. If you're an investor, think about how it can aid you in making better decisions. So just really, I'm a big believer in the quality of information. So it leads to better decision making. So please, be a part of it and help make it part of the way that you make decisions as well.
Thank you, Jeff.
I think that was Jeff. This is David here, and just to reiterate the points. Oh, no problem at all. Just to reiterate the points that were made, we really value the feedback and hope to receive feedback in the current public consultation period. And the only nuance I'll add is to really encourage folks to reach out to the staff here, to the sector analysts for industries you're interested in. We're always happy to jump on a phone call and do whatever we can to support the market in understanding and preparing that feedback. So please do not hesitate to reach out. We're always very happy and interested to interact with folks in the marketplace.
And maybe just one other comment as well. Feel free to reach out to the leadership of SASB as well. And if you need a speaker to come talk about these issues, you've got an audience out there that you think would be interested in learning more about this. We'd be happy to try to find the time to help you to get the word out on these issues. So feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you, Lauren, Jeff, David, and Alex. I think we had a fruitful discussion, and I'm sure this is not the last time we hear from SASB. It's quite an exciting accomplishment. Have a good day, everyone. Good morning in California.
Yeah, Liv, I just had one final slide. So just some housekeeping again. We're going to be sending out a recording and slides to everyone after this webinar. When you close the webinar, you're going to be directed to a survey. Please submit that. I think that's also part of the CPE credit fulfillment. As a reminder, within a week of this webinar, you'll get an email from training@workiva.com regarding the CPE credits. I included the URL on this last slide for the FSA that David had talked about. We just updated it to include more information. So take a look at that. If you have any additional questions, feel free to email us info@sasb.org. And thank you everyone for your attendance. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.